Hey there, how's it going? Welcome back to this, the show on the internet. I'm your host, a dude with a microphone. That's the little intro I think I'm gonna start doing for each episode. I think it's funny. That's just me though. Anyways, for today's episode, we are going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart, which is education. Going to school and learning things. Everyone loves that, right? And I'm probably one of the few people in the world, maybe not few people, there's a decent amount, but it's certainly not a majority of people in the world who really enjoy school. I've always really enjoyed school. I love learning things, new topics, old topics with just more depth into them, anything like that. I really enjoy learning. It's a big part of who I am to explore things that I don't know, try to understand what I don't understand. Because if I understand more, that means I can connect more with people, it means I can explain more to people, and just have that knowledge and impart it onto other people. I feel like that's a main benefit of loving education so much. You get to do those sorts of things. You get to be the little teacher. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own personal experience in school, growing up in the public school system, maybe a little bit about college. I think I might do a separate episode about college entirely, because it's a completely different beast due to COVID being a thing during my college years. It didn't exist during my time in the public schooling system, so it didn't have an impact there. I'll try to talk a little bit about what COVID might have done to schooling now, because it certainly had a really big impact, like huge impact, but I'll get into that later. So my personal experience with school, like I said, I always loved school. It's just something that I enjoy. I was identified as gifted very early on. You get into that gifted honors program. They do little tests for you throughout the years that you're in school in order to subtly sort of figure out whether you're in that sort of bracket or not, whether you're in that advanced bracket where you need to be pushed more. There's something that called an IEP plan, IEP standing for Individualized Education Program Plan, and a lot of students in the honors program are going to have one of those plans. I didn't personally interact with mine, although I did have one. I didn't know that up until the end of high school, where I got called into a random meeting with somebody I had never met before to talk about my IEP plan. And they were asking me about all this stuff, like what I'm interested in, how I think I do in school, and like my plans for the future. I was like, what is going on here? This feels like a really weird interview of people trying to like figure out who I am and like what's going on with me, this person that I don't know. But I think it was just to sort of wrap up the IEP plan in itself and be like, this kid's doing pretty alright for right now. He's going on and he has these sorts of plans. We can send him off and he's good. I think that was what it was about, but I'm not entirely sure. In the IEP plans, a lot of people have control or some sort of insight into the plan itself. You got teachers, the parents themselves typically get to at least view it. You got counselors. Sometimes the student themselves knows about it and gets to interact with their plan, give feedback on what teachers or counselors might have tried to implement and be like, yeah, this is working for me, or this isn't working for me at all. But a lot of times I feel like people don't even know they have a plan, because it's just in the schooling system that the teachers can see. We can't see it, we being like when you're a student. So being in the gifted program, you typically receive certain accommodations. Technically, the gifted program is under the umbrella of special education, This is usually supposed to signify students that need really significant modification in how they are taught and what they are taught as a result of a learning disability, for example. But because gifted students receive certain modifications as well, it's under that umbrella of special education. A lot of times, gifted students also have certain conditions like ADHD that influence their learning, so teachers and counselors need to keep that in mind and be like, yes, this person is gifted, but they also have some stuff that might be going on that might be affecting them, so they try to keep that in mind. The implications of being gifted are a very double-edged sword. I think if you ever talk to somebody who is in the gifted program, the honors program, when they were a kid in the public schooling system, they will probably say something similar. It was cool to be in the honors program. You had very slight advantages over your peers. You felt a bit more accomplished. You would typically get certain little rewards, like if you had a high enough GPA, you would get certain rewards, or if you do well enough in the school year or on tests, you might get invited to special meetings where it's like celebrating students, like, you did a good job, you got good grades on this, we're gonna celebrate you with pizza or ice cream or something like that. I had quite a few of those. So there were some upsides, certainly, and typically when you were in the honors program, a lot of your classes would be classified as honors. Not inherently all of them, because sometimes you might have a specific learning disability, something like dyslexia or dyscalculia. So you might be gifted in math, but it might be really hard for you to read really long passages because of dyslexia, something like that. So even though you are in the gifted program, sometimes it's not like uniform throughout how good you are at every single subject. People are not that cut and dry. They're not that simple. It varies from person to person. The pressure to be gifted and be honors felt unrelenting at times. You always sort of needed to do well, and when you didn't do well, it was like, why are you even classified as honors? Why aren't you putting in the work? Why aren't you doing as well as you should be doing? And there was always that fear of being like bumped down if you didn't do well enough. So you always pushed yourself as well really hard to do good. You didn't want to lose that sort of status. And it was a status, honestly. It made you feel different. It made you feel special. Honors was definitely where I belonged. That program, surrounded by people who I loved and were really nice to me and were able to challenge me in certain ways in school, which was good. I definitely belonged there, no doubt about it. But I have a very, very strong competitive drive. So I'm always trying to do well at something. I don't like doing poorly at something. Even just very trivial things. Like if I were to play cornhole with someone and I don't do very well because I don't really know all of the tricks to play cornhole well, I'll get pretty upset. Even though it's really not something that big of a deal to get upset over, I get frustrated pretty easily when I'm not good at something because I want to be good at things. So because my drive to be the best at everything was so strong, it was always frustrating when I realized that there were always people who were going to be better than me at something. And I think that's just sort of a lesson you have to learn with time. You always want to be the best, but it's just not going to be the case often that you are the best at everything, certainly. You're not going to be the best at everything. There can only be one person who's the best at everything. And a lot of the times, it wasn't me. I was gifted, I did well, but I wasn't the best. And that frustrated me because I wanted to be the best. I wasn't capable of it though, because that's just how it goes. I was unable to really feel accomplished because of that. I don't really feel like good grades and test scores really mattered to me. I didn't feel a sense of pride in that sort of thing. But if I did poorly, it impacted me. But if I did well, I was like, well, that's what you're supposed to do. That sort of mindset that I had, you're supposed to do that well. That's your bare minimum. If you don't meet that, what are you even doing? But over time, and as I grew up as a person, I've come to grips with that. I was very aware of the fact that I was labeled gifted and in the honors courses, and that I was up to that level of honors early on into elementary school, into junior high school, into high school. But I wasn't consciously aware of the fact that I had things like ADHD or OCD that I do now. I think subconsciously, I knew that there were certain things that were wrong with me that I couldn't describe. And I knew something was off in some sort of way. I couldn't put it into words then, but now I am able to do so. I was really hyper-focused all the time on certain topics or books. I had a very niche love for learning words in particular. I really loved just reading the dictionary to find new words and learning how to spell them. I really enjoyed doing well in all the spelling bees that you do as an elementary schooler, because it was a big deal. Even though it was, not the hardest words in the world for a 10-year-old. I did win one spelling bee one time in either 4th or 5th grade. So it was either 9 or 10, something like that. And I was so proud of that win for some reason, even though it really wasn't that much of a big deal. I was like, this means so much to me. Oh my goodness. So I look back on that memory often and I'm like, that's funny that I cared that much. I do struggle with certain things though, like drawing. Art is just not my strong suit. I can't really do it, and I know that a lot of people would say it's a skill that you practice, and so if you never practice it, you're not going to be good at it, which, yeah, that makes sense to me. But even with a ton of practice, I feel like, it's not something that I'm interested in, so I'll never get good at it, so I'm bad at it. I'm really bad at keeping myself still, just sitting in my chair or quiet in a classroom, and so that was obviously probably frustrating for a lot of my teachers. It's very confusing to me why I was never evaluated properly for those sorts of conditions like ADHD. Even though I was very obviously like bouncing off the walls at times and then super hyper focusing on something, I look back at those memories now and I'm like, that's obvious. How did nobody know? Why did I have to be the one to figure it out so much later in my life? Because typically, teachers catch that sort of thing and they're like, I have a recommendation for the student because I think they might have this condition, or I think they should be evaluated for this type of thing. And typically, that sort of thing happens. If it doesn't go through and they don't go ahead and get diagnosed, then it gets left. But typically, if they do hit the mark and they're like, this kid is dealing with this sort of issue, that's your introduction into how to sort of deal with those issues. But that never happened for me. Oftentimes, a lot of students who are honors have one of those types of conditions that impact their life and their learning. There's a lot of instances of people being gifted and having ADHD, OCD, that sort of mental illness. I don't like saying mental illness now because it just feels negative, and so I try to put a spin on it, so I just say something like condition. But typically, the honors and mental illness factions overlapped. That's typically how it is. I had a wide array of acquaintances in school. Not friends. I had a lot of acquaintances, I would say. It was very easy for me to talk to people in a very general manner, which is very ironic because now that's something I'm very bad at. And I'm very bad at initiating conversations. I can do a conversation pretty well if somebody is talking to me. I do really well if you come up to me and start talking to me. Like, that's easy for me, but I am not as good as I was as a kid at talking to people, initiating that conversation, because I think I didn't have any awareness as a kid, and I just kind of barreled through everything. But I had a lot of acquaintances, a lot of peers, but I think I would describe myself as having very few true friends. I talked a lot during classes, to the point where teachers would sometimes have to address me in order for me to stop talking. Even if it was just somebody behind me or in front of me, they were my friends, I would talk to them about just like anything. Sometimes I would just bother them for no reason, because that ADHD part of me kicks in and it's like, you need to do something because you're bored. You need to get someone's attention. There were a lot of times where I really wanted to get called on in class in order to answer, and so you put your hand in the air and you're waving it around like a madman, and the teacher can see you, obviously, and they're like, okay, I know this kid wants to answer this question, but this kid also like answers every other question, so I have to make sure that they aren't the only one answering all the questions. And I was that kid that wanted to answer all the questions, and so I would get really disappointed if I wasn't called on. Like, oh, they think I can't do it. And, that was just me as a kid. That's what I thought what he was like. I was like, why wouldn't they call on me? They know I know it. Now, I can look back at that and be like, that's silly. I really craved that attention, I think, recognition from teachers and other students for doing things well and knowing things. I really wanted that. I wanted to be looked at as somebody who knew things. I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. There was no specific group that I felt like I was essential to. I didn't feel that in elementary school, middle school, even high school. There were groups I associated with, a lot of them, very different types of groups too, but there was never that feeling of there's a plan to do this sort of thing and these people are going, but if this person isn't going to go, then it's not really something we want to do anymore because they're an important person and we don't want to make them sad because they can't go, so the plan gets canceled. I never really felt like that. I was never essential to a group where it was like, this person can't go, plan's canceled, maybe another time. A lot of my school friendships died out almost immediately after that shared environment of being in school was no longer present in my life. And I look back on that now and I was like thinking these people were going to be my friends forever and we would always stay in contact, and that just didn't happen. Like, they're just no longer really a part of my life. And I think if they were to come up to me and talk to me, I think I would be just fine having a conversation with them. But it's not like I go out of my way to talk to them. And this continued on into college, honestly. Like, I would associate with people for a year or two, and then they would just sort of drift away, and that's it. I think COVID completely screwed up my college experience as a whole. Everything became online. Online classes were very tedious. People didn't even go to the school. I lived on campus for all of my years. So there was a period where people had to leave because they were out of state, for example, and so they didn't want to stay on campus with COVID going on and everything. They would rather be in their homes, safe. But I was on campus for all of my years. So having to deal with that as online classes became the norm was very tedious. Education as a whole just sort of got screwed over by COVID, flipped on its head. I don't really know how we undo some of those changes, like how we do online assignments, the influx of cheating, because it was so easy for you to you're on your computer, so like, why don't you just pull up the answers? Nobody's gonna know. I don't really know how we get back into the swing of how school used to feel. I don't think that we ever will, maybe. Maybe this is just how schooling is now. It's very different. Somewhat foreign to me, honestly. During my time in school, I got bullied a lot. You know, a lot of people can say the same sort of thing, that they got bullied in high school, middle school, elementary school. Kids are mean. If one thing is true, is that kids can be mean sometimes, and they don't really have those filters that you put on when you're an adult in order to keep the conflict away. They didn't really care. So I had a lot of times in school where I felt like I was being targeted just for being who I was, and that's a very demoralizing thing. I got emotional very quickly, and people figured that out about me. Whenever someone tried to put me down or say things about me, I got really angry or very sad, and they noticed that. And so they would keep targeting me because maybe they got a kick out of it and they thought I was pathetic, something like that. There were several individuals that typically stuck amongst themselves. They had their own little group, and they would usually mess with me in a lot of ways. Since they were almost always in my classes with me, they were also in the gifted program, so it's not like when you're in honors you're automatically a good person or that you don't make trouble. You certainly do. Sometimes a lot more trouble than other kids do. Since they were always in my classes, it was pretty much impossible for me to escape the feeling of dread of going to certain classes and knowing that somebody would be there and maybe something would happen that day that would really just make me so upset and ruin my day. And there was a lot of those sorts of people in all of my classes. I would be made fun of pretty relentlessly for being short, nerdy, that kind of thing. I got upset easily, so they noticed that, and they're just gonna keep making a target out of you. I never bothered reporting any sorts of bullying, just because I don't think it would have done anything, honestly. I don't think that schools deal with bullying very well. If I were to have reported the bullying, I think the targeting would have only gotten worse. And I don't think, it would have been good for me to do that kind of thing. Because when you report bullying and you get somebody in trouble, now everybody knows you're the person that goes and blabs to the teacher. Even if it's like something you should do when somebody's really being mean to you. Like if somebody had that happen to them, they would probably want to do that too, but other people don't see that sort of way because they don't experience what you experience. There was only one person I could really ever remember that stood up for me. I'm very grateful to that person because it didn't seem like anybody would really want to bother standing up for me for how poorly I was treated, even if they experienced it. Even if other students observed it, they didn't do anything. It didn't really matter to them. It's not their problem. This one person came to me directly and was talking to me about how certain people wanted that person to be mean to me. And that's really screwed up to me, honestly. That they would go to somebody and be like, yeah, this guy, you should be mean to this guy. We hate this guy. We don't like this guy. Kids are really mean. They're very good at coordinating how to be mean. Even in high school, there were so many times where people are just directly belittling me, making fun of me, excluding me from things, getting betrayed by people I considered friends. You'd think that when you're in high school, that sort of thing goes away, but it really doesn't whatsoever. It just evolves, especially with the advent of technology that's became a lot more digital. The bullying could be in person and digital now. You could be attacked on both fronts, at home and at school, so you were never really safe ever. once you make that step of getting somebody in trouble for what they did, even if what they did is objectively not a good thing, the student who did the reporting now has a reputation. And when you have a reputation, it means you get avoided. And when you get avoided, that means you don't have as many friends. And you're getting excluded by the people who were associated with that individual, who were in their clique. Or maybe even other people who are like, I don't want to mess with this kid. If he flies off the handle at me, he's going to get me in trouble. So you might start getting ignored. And so it feels like when you try to report bullying, there's really no good outcome unless you're able to just amicably resolve it between you and whoever it is, but that doesn't really ever happen. Bullying is just a very sad thing to think about, that it still happens and we are just very mean at times. Kids can be mean, teenagers are mean, adults are mean, and it doesn't really ever stop. And that is something that I wish wasn't true. If not only because I was somebody affected by it, but because it just feels wrong to me. Like being that mean to somebody and targeting somebody is just really awful in my eyes, and it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage to you as a person. It has such an impact on you that can just drastically change how you live your life and the sorts of things that you fear. But that's just my experience. So it wasn't entirely negative. A lot of good things did happen to me in school. I found things that I enjoyed, like music. I discovered my love for reading and writing and history. So all of those things that I still love now were introduced to me as a kid in school, and so for that, I'm grateful. But overall, I'd say school was a negative experience. I think there's plenty of issues that students deal with now that I didn't deal with, and so it feels like there's so much on their shoulders, and you can't really do much about some of those things. Like, imagine you're a teacher, and you just teach the student for math, and this student comes to you dealing with so many separate things, but in that classroom they're supposed to just think of math. And it just doesn't work like that. Students are people, so they can't just turn off parts of themselves. You can't just go into math mode. As much as I wish I could just go into math mode, that sounds pretty cool. You can't really do that. That's not something that you can just flip. I think it's a very commonly known thing that schools are pretty underfunded. Lots of teachers don't get paid very well. Some programs get canceled because there's just not funding for it anymore. Nobody's really doing it, so why bother? Some things like football and the music program are always going to sort of be there, but they might struggle individually when it comes down to their needs getting answered quickly. Teachers are really doing what they do for the love of the game and caring for students, or maybe because there isn't anything else that they're able to do at this point of their life, so they just sort of stick out what they know and what works because it's secure and it's better compared to quitting and not finding a better job. A lot of teachers even work 2 jobs because the pay is just not good enough, so they work a second job. And I mean, just being a teacher by itself is very overwhelming sometimes. And I say that because I have a degree in education, so I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be a teacher. I went through college for 4 years learning how to be a teacher. It was not fun. Even though I really do love teaching and, being like a mentor for people and providing education to other people, showing them how interested I am in certain topics and hoping that they get interested in it too. Being a teacher sucks. It really sucks. and you can't really control a lot of things when you're a teacher. You can't control the curriculum, you can't control the class sizes. Sometimes you don't get to control who is and who isn't in your class, even if you try to make a big deal out of it. Sometimes there's just things out of your control. Students are missing class more often than ever. They're cheating in very creative ways, using AI because they don't want to do the work themselves. And students are really becoming disillusioned with the things that they're learning in school, because to them, nothing that they learn in school is valuable. I can't even blame them entirely. A lot of the things that we teach students seem to become less and less essential as the years go on, and they need skills now that school isn't really able to teach them, or at least teach them well. And so I can't entirely blame students for not loving school a lot. I got everything that I needed out of school, the types of skills that I wanted, and the knowledge that I wanted, but not everybody's gonna have that experience. I'm very much in the minority, I feel like, when I talk about learning, because I love learning so much. I like just learning anything, so it didn't really matter to me what it is. It just had value because it existed. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the sort of history of public schooling, a history of public schooling, because, schooling's been around for a long time, but that's typically like private schooling because it was only for the super wealthy, and that's something I could do in a separate topic video. But public schooling is its own beast. So if you don't like history, I'm sorry, because I'm going to talk about history for a while. It's my show, and I get to talk about my hyperfixation. The Industrial Revolution really kick-started an explosion in opportunities. There were so many new jobs that were created as a result of all of these new machines being created, new types of energy. You needed to make those sorts of machines. You needed to make things that were powered by those sorts of machines, and so there was a bunch of opportunities for education to become accessible and valuable to more people than ever before. Compulsory public education was not always a thing. We, in our current age, just sort of view it as the norm. It's been the norm for so long now that sort of accepted. When you're a kid, you go to school, but that wasn't always the case. You would work on the farm as a poor farmer, and you didn't get to go to school and learn how to read or write. But eventually that changed. The intentions behind public schooling were not always the most pure. Factories needed workers who had certain skills, listened to orders that they were given, and showed up on time for work. Any of those things sound familiar to you? It's our schools. It's exactly like our schools. So public schools provided an environment for potential future workers in factories to become accustomed to the types of things that their employers wanted, the whims of their employers. They had to be showing up where they're told, when they're told to, doing what they're told to do. And if that doesn't describe public schooling to a T, then I don't know what does. There's one person who I think is pretty important when you talk about this vein of public schooling, this sort of pipeline of schools to factories. His name is Horace Mann. I'll probably put a picture of him on screen in post so you can see who he is. But he was pretty influential. He went to Prussia, which is modern-day Germany, and he brought the model of education that they had there. And what Prussia did is they went into the territories that they conquered because they were really good at conquering other people. They had a very strong military, and they assimilated those people to make them more Prussian. And that's not a very easy task, so they would gather all of these peoples that they conquered, they would put them into one place, and they would teach them how to be Prussian, and they would try to overwrite whatever it was that they knew prior to that. And so Horace Mann goes to Prussia and he sees this and he's like, I can bring this to the United States, and I think that would be good. So gather all these students from very different backgrounds, have them be taught a very common set of values and skills, the American values that are very beneficial to factory owners. So factory workers were supposed to be efficient, sort of abandon whatever gave them their unique personality or set of ideals, what made them them, because when you're just sort of on a conveyor belt on a line, you sort of lose yourself because you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. As a result of this idea coming into existence, that we could turn our schools into a sort of mechanism to create the ideal factory worker, a lot of industrial lobbyists, the big names, your Rockefellers, your Carnegies, that type of thing, they really loved the idea of compulsory education. They loved it. And it was viewed as them being so philanthropic to provide donations for these schools. Let me give you this library that you need for your school so that you can create these factory workers that I can use later. It's very nefarious when you think about it. And I mean, this sort of thing is not secret. You can look up this sort of information and you can find it. And that's why I think history is so cool, because nobody would really know about this type of stuff if you don't investigate into it. That's why I think history is important. Because I mean, when you think of school, you just think of school like, yeah, you go to learn things and to become a better person, but that wasn't always the case. The students that were in these public schools weren't supposed to become great people. They weren't supposed to be the thinkers or scientists or the politicians. Those people already existed. Those roles were for the children of the really wealthy, the elites who could afford very special private schooling and be molded into the perfect candidate for the role that they needed to be in. It wasn't that. They wanted to make every student into a potential success. They needed them because they would do work. I feel like school is no longer that end-all be-all thing that it was back in the late 20th century to like the 2010s. If you are a millennial or Gen Z, you sort of accepted a general narrative in your life, and it went like this. You go to school, school gives you the skills you need to impress your employer and get a good job. That job would give you financial security, and it let you feel more able to begin to discover who you are as a person. You would find your way in the world. You'd find a partner. You'd eventually get married, have a family, and then eventually get to enjoy your retirement in maybe your 70s, typically in your 60s, but maybe your 70s. White-collar jobs started to be the big thing. There was no longer this emphasis on farming or factory work. It became these higher education, these sort of more specialized roles that were looked at as ideal. There was a shift that happened. It went from being super encouraged to have these sorts of blue-collar jobs, the ones that worked with their hands. This was viewed as the ideal role you could fill. You were aiding your country, you were serving your country just by filling that role, and you were patriotic because you did it. Eventually, though, there was this flip that happened, I feel like. No longer was it a good thing, an honorable thing to have these sort of blue-collar jobs. It was looked down upon. If you didn't have a white-collar job, meaning, you didn't get your hands dirty with that type of thing. If you didn't have one of those sorts of jobs, you were not ideal. When you had a sort of white-collar job, it was giving you the salary you needed in order to create a good life during the Cold War, specifically, like the 60s. The Soviet Union, compared to the US, was viewed as being more advanced, scientifically, and gifted than the US. And that was a big deal back in the day, when the Soviet Union and the US were always competing. And so the US saw this perceived inferiority, and they said, we have to do something about this. And how we're going to do it is we're going to go into the schools, we're going to change up the curriculums in order to address this. We're going to focus our efforts on creating brilliant scientists or brilliant mathematicians in order to win back our superiority from the Soviet Union. We went really hard for a long time to make these STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, and math. We went really hard at space exploration because it was a big deal that the Soviet Union put a satellite into space, and so we were like, we have to do something about that. They're better than us right now, we have to one-up them. And so we sent somebody to the moon. It wasn't just because we wanted to explore the moon for exploring the moon, it was a way in order to look better than somebody. That's very interesting to me, I feel like, when you put all of this into perspective. It wasn't that, the people who did the mission itself or the scientists who made it possible, maybe that wasn't their intention, but that was what the government was trying to do. That was what they thought was important. Eventually, though, becoming a white-collar worker is no longer in demand. I feel like currently another flip has happened, where if you go to college and you get that college education and you get your degree, you kind of wasted your time. And I feel like a lot of people probably have that mindset right now too, and that's what it feels like, at least from what I see online, the sort of sentiment that I see there. Now it's the blue-collar jobs that are going to be ideal right now, because they can't be taken over by AI. That blue-collar type of job isn't able to be taken over by AI yet. It might happen later, but it hasn't happened yet. We still need bodies to do things. So a lot of white-collar work has been taken over by AI. So all of these workers who were in these positions, or prospective workers who wanted to fill those positions in the future, their jobs just aren't jobs anymore. They're done by something else. And I know that AI has also created a lot of different types of jobs, but it's centered around the AI. So yes, it created jobs. AI can technically create jobs, but it's all centered around the AI being better in the future and able to automate more and take more jobs. So all of these people who went to college hoping to find this perfect job realizes that their position either doesn't exist anymore or is going to be taken sometime in the future. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people are going to be left jobless. It's already sort of happening. There's a lot of people who are living, and I only know about the US, so there's a lot of people in the US who are losing jobs because of AI, or it's really hard for them to find a job right now. The job market's kind of rough. So for the time being, blue collar jobs are safe, and I feel like that's kind of ironic. That, being a farmer or a factory worker was always something that was good, and then for a while it flipped, and it was, if you were a blue-collar worker, you were unintelligent. You must not have been smart enough or competent enough to secure a better job, so you just took what was available. And I feel like that was true for a long time. Like if a kid were to be asked, what does your dad do? And they say, oh, he builds houses. Somebody might say, oh, does he like design the houses? No, he goes there and he builds the houses. Oh, so he like went to school for architecture. No, he builds the houses. Okay. So he's a construction worker. Yeah. And that's how the conversation might go. And it's very subtle, because, you know, they don't want to be rude to the kid or anything like that. They might think that being a construction worker is something to look down upon. But I feel like for a while, even still maybe at this point, we are looking at blue-collar workers and being like, these people are beneath other sorts of people because they don't have these sorts of skills, or because they have these jobs. They needed them because they couldn't do anything else. Now I feel like there's a lot of people who really resent the education that they received in college. A lot of adults are disappointed because they view everything that they did now as pointless. They rack up all this student debt to enter a field that is just gonna be completely dominated by AI, and they can't enter the field at all, so they don't know what sort of job to do. They don't have any other sort of skills that they can utilize to become successful. You need to completely switch the entirety of your life. They probably wish that they had entered the trade field instead to secure a more secure job, because it remains to be seen right now whether or not employers are just gonna jump right headfirst into AI. Right now it's kind of mixed. There's a lot of companies that really are going hard on AI and others that aren't for the time being. But there's going to be a time where I think a lot of fields are focused around AI. So whether or not employers are going to value the human workers to the extent that, you know, they're employing people in order to do these jobs, even if technically they could get AI or some sort of other method to fill that position, maybe in the future there's not going to be as many employers who are willing to just go with people instead of machines. Because, you know, when you have human workers, you have to give them things like healthcare and wages and days off and that sort of thing. And businesses now are all just sort of about making profit. And that investment into AI that you can do, it's probably a really expensive investment, but in the long run, maybe it's going to be less expensive than paying all these people to do all these sorts of things. Maybe it's just me who is like worried about this sort of thing. I know there are people who are really worried about what AI is going to be doing to us. What jobs are they going to be taking? What jobs are they not going to be taking? You know, what is safe? What sort of field do I go into now? I read an article that was talking about how all of the computer science dropout rates are increasing in colleges. Like, in order to get your computer science degree, you're going to go to school for it. There's less people trying to be computer scientists right now. And that makes sense, because those jobs are probably going to be dominated by AI. So now all the people who were planning to get those jobs look at the world around them and they say, I have no idea what to do. I have no direction now currently. Everything that I thought was possible, or my general direction in life, it is gone. I don't have direction in life now. The idea of NEETs was not a thing that was in the public consciousness once upon a time. That was a very niche thing that you knew about if you were on the internet. NEET standing for not in education, employment, or training. NEET. And so there's a lot more of these NEETs now than ever before. There's millions of them worldwide because people don't really know what to do. They had this narrative that they were fed, that if you worked really hard and you went to school and you got a good job, that all the good stuff would just sort of come to you. And that's not true anymore. And I think a lot of people have recognized this. And because they recognize it, some people gave up. Some people are still trying, but it's still hard to keep going when there's not much available to you. And so now schools are seeing a lot less students applying. A lot less people wanting to get certain degrees especially. And there are some fields that are protected from that right now. Like I saw, again, an article was talking about how healthcare work is really in right now and how healthcare jobs are up this percentage. And that makes sense because, healthcare is sort of always needed. For now. We haven't gotten to the point where AI is able to do everything that a healthcare worker is able to do yet. So for right now, healthcare is a pretty good field. Does that mean that everybody is going to start getting into healthcare now? What happens when everybody starts trying to get into healthcare now because it's an available field, and then eventually it becomes automated? And so that's why I think it's very valid for people to be scared about AI. I'm scared about AI in a lot of aspects. Not in the way that people are like, it's gonna ruin the world because all of the robots are going to take over and destroy us. No, I think we're just gonna get slowly choked out by artificial intelligence taking jobs that could be filled by people. But why would you fill it with somebody when you could just get a machine to do it? And that's always sort of been a thing. Technology is made in order to make things easier, and that makes sense. I get that. Things being easier is good. When the Industrial Revolution was happening, all these machines were in order to make products faster or better. And so it's not always... It's not a new idea that technology sometimes makes jobs go away. That's not something that is exclusive to AI. That's sort of always been a thing. But at least when the Industrial Revolution was happening, there were so many different types of jobs that were needed that all of those people that might have been filling a role earlier still had something that they could go to that was possible. And I don't really know if that's a switch that we currently are able to do very well. We're very scared about jobs not existing for anybody anymore. And it's not entirely unfounded that that sort of thing is gonna happen. But I think for the time being, we're gonna see a lot of people struggling and a lot of people having little direction in their life. I feel like that. Sometimes I don't really know where I'm going in my life. For various reasons, some of them related to work, some of them related to life choices as a whole, who I am, the people around me. So I've typically been ending these sessions with like a what do we do or what can we do sort of thing. And when it comes to this area, school, there's a lot of things that we can do about how to address getting an education as a whole. I think getting an education is still something that people should do. Public schooling is still a good thing, but when it comes to way later in life stuff, what you're going to be doing as an adult, it might not always be college now anymore. It might be getting a job in the trades. You might become a mechanic. You might become a construction worker. You might become an air conditioning tech, that kind of thing. And so while some of those jobs might involve like really specialized education. Some of them are just going to be able to be filled by people who are willing to put in the time to learn this new skill, these new sets of skills in order to make their way in life. It's probably going to be rough for a while for people going to college. There's definitely going to be fields that do well for a while, and there's going to be some that really suffer. And for those people, the fixes are going to be pretty individualized. There's no one size fits all, as is the case with a lot of issues, I feel like. I wish there was a one size fits all answer, but there really isn't, because people are so different. And we're all interested in different things and capable of different things. There might be more people wanting to do very niche things, like becoming a video creator on the internet, for example, or a streamer, or that kind of thing. People might start just doing very different stuff because they want to do it. That's this entire thing for me, honestly. It was always something that I wanted to do, create videos, put them on the internet, because I thought being a YouTuber was so cool. I still think it's cool. The level that YouTubers have gotten to at this point is enormous. You're able to do so many things as this big YouTuber. You have big projects that you can do. It's not just little YouTube videos anymore, little series. Posting about your favorite thing or this Let's Play. It's really big now. So there might be a lot of people trying to do that sort of thing. More streamers, more video creators, more video editors. A lot of people might start getting it back into those really nitty-gritty sort of blue-collar jobs, like being a farmer, or doing that sort of thing, the really tough jobs. Because, and I can only speak for what I know about the US, because I live in the US, a lot of those types of jobs are opening up. Maybe this video will age very poorly, or maybe it will age very well, but right now there's a lot of blue-collar jobs being opened up, let's say. A lot of positions are becoming available, and so maybe people are gonna start going towards that, and we're gonna see a lot more people willing to do that sort of tough work, and it's gonna be a fine thing again for a kid to say, my dad's a construction worker, and nobody's gonna look at that kid and think differently about their dad. The saying goes, if you find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I don't know if I entirely agree with that, because you're not gonna find that perfect thing the first time around, probably. And so you're gonna go through a lot of stages of your life trying to figure it out, what it is you want to do, and what it is that is going to make your life possible. Those don't always coincide with one another. Sometimes you have to take the bullet and just say, I need to, for at least a time, put off my dreams and just get myself stable. That sort of idea is very depressing to think about, people having to put off what it is that they enjoy in order to survive. But I think that's just kind of the way that we're going right now. You're gonna need to take those sacrifices, because not everybody's in the best financial situation, and it's really just come down to, how do we survive now at this point? How do we sort of keep ourselves afloat? And that's what you really worry about now. And when it comes to what you want to do to enjoy things later in your life, maybe those things have to be put on pause. Maybe not permanently. Like for me, there's a lot of things that I want to do, things that I think I would enjoy later on in life, but I have to put a pause on it because it's not going to make me more wealthy. It's not going to support me financially. Or maybe it would, but the opportunity that would be there isn't available or I don't get it, for example. So things might be hard for a while for a lot of people, and I see that sentiment online. People really struggling to find direction, people really struggling to find a purpose and to keep themselves going when all of this stuff gets really hard. And I don't know exactly what you do about that. I feel like that's what I say every time. I do not claim to be this great philosopher. I do not claim to be this problem solver. Certainly, I have good ideas sometimes, but I can't solve these sorts of large-scale ideas on my own. I don't have the power to do that. Even if I did have a plan, I don't have the power to do it, but I also don't have the plan. I'm missing both of the components there. And somebody's gonna figure it out eventually. Somebody's going to rise above and sort of put a direction towards a lot of people in life. I don't want everything to sound so gloomy, and that there's no point to doing things, and that things are super hard and everything's awful, because there's a lot of good things about life still. And it's just finding those small things that really keep you going, because there's right now, I think, a period of time where people are just gonna have to keep it going. You know, just keep the train going. And that's kind of what a lot of people are doing right now. And I hope that changes. I really do hope that that changes soon, that a lot of people are able to do what it is that they want to do without fear of what's going to happen tomorrow when they can't pay a bill, or what they're going to do in the future after they didn't get this job. Because those sorts of things really weigh on your mind and really stress you out. And I deal with a lot of that as well. I think a lot about, what it is I'm going to be doing in the future. What is going to give me the opportunity to succeed in life. Quote unquote success. What is going to get me through the day after day. It'll come around. It'll come around eventually. It's very hard for people to feel like there's hope when everything sort of seems hopeless. When you're in that sort of place, a lot of people have adopted that nihilism point of view, that things don't really have a purpose anymore, that there's no point to doing this thing or that other thing because of this reason. All I know is that some of the things that they say are true, but I also don't think it's the best frame of mind because it just sort of shuts you down. And at least in my brain, I always at least keep going. The train is always sort of chugging. The train does not stop. I am the train. And although the train might be slowing down a little bit, the steam is not flowing as efficiently as it once did, or as often as it might be able to. The train at least still keeps going. I at least keep going, and at that point, I can be happy. I can be happy to say that the train is still going. Because it's very easy to see the train slowing down and think, well, the train's slowing down. I mean, inevitably, the train's gonna stop, right? Not inherently. Something might come along that fuels the train again and makes it go faster and more efficiently than ever before. And at least if you keep the train going, you have the opportunity to find that. But when you sort of give up and stop fueling the train, yeah, it's gonna stop, I think. if you stop fueling the train, it's gonna stop. That makes sense. And so my mindset is, as long as I can keep the train going, I'm good. I can figure out how to fuel the train somehow, because life does always sort of just keep going, I feel like. And maybe that's just a me thing and the life that I've lived so far. And so I understand if not everybody can get into that mindset. It's at least comforting to me that I can keep the train going. I don't know what's going to fuel the train in the future. Something will, though. As long as I keep the train going. And I hope something keeps your train going, too. Whatever that might be. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.